shorter than the other ones. Hi everyone, how are we? Good, thank God. Let's wake up. Is it working? I don't seem to have my Prezzo. Hello?
1 second, sorry.
That's all right, no worries at all. No worries at all. Hey, if I say class license spectrum, who knows what that is? Okay, cool. Just calibrating. Oh, here we are, connectivity and mobility in smart cities. So it looks like my previous speakers have done some of my work for me, which is great. The clicker doesn't work. Where do I point it? No. Aha! Great. Okay. Wonderful tech. Okay, so I just wanted to cover 4 things briefly today. Cities and technology. Telstra's starting to use the word good as well as smart. There's a reason for that. I wanted to talk about Internet of Things, but more about the connectivity options in Internet of Things. Very briefly talking about insights from all sorts of data. And really I want to talk a lot about transport and the Internet of moving things, which is, I think, something of huge economic and social value. So this is Sienna. Sienna is sort of been an inspiration for the Good Cities work in Telstra. Around about the early 1300s, they were talking. They created these set of paintings called the Allegory of Good and Bad Government, and they were looking at all the different aspects of government that contributed to good society, good health, prosperity, and what the people running the government should be doing about that. So they're very advanced thinking. We're talking 1328 or something like that, and it turns out that resonates in more modern times. So, I wanted to talk about what good versus smart is. Hello, clicker. Okay, so smart cities has really been a bit of a tech push generally, and that's because the tech has been very exciting. You know, we can have traffic lights talking to trucks, and we can have smart road signs talking to cars, and there's technology metering everything, and that's fantastic. But ultimately, it's really got to be about the people, as Brooke was saying earlier, so we definitely concur on that. And there's a bit of cultural change that needs to happen to make that go. So what Telstra did, and I've only been with them 8 months, and as I came in, they've been developing a framework which strangely has 10 points, just like Brooke. Not quite, but they all overlap. And you can see there's a whole load of spokes, and there's different aspects that are about the context that the technology needs to be in, so that the people at the centre there on a bicycle, nice active transport, do it, can enjoy a better quality of life and better economics. And today I'm going to talk about a few of those. All right, let's go. All right, so Internet of Things, we've all seen the various statistics, so I won't dwell on that. There's going to be a lot of connected things. So these 2 circles, on the one side, stage left, you're right, is licensed spectrum, and that's pretty much what the phone companies run, okay? So that's called LTE for long-term evolution. So that's been 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G is coming. Most of those Gs have been going up. There's another category called narrowband IoT, which talks about Cat1, Cat-M, Cat-M2, and those are actually going down in speed and using far less power and greater range, and we'll talk about those. On the other side, there's unlicensed or actually class spectrum, and things like Bluetooth, Zigbee, Wi-Fi, LoRa, Sigfox are in there. And I'll just briefly talk about LoRa. So last year, Telstra ran an Internet of Things challenge in Melbourne. And what we did, we built some little kits. These are based on Arduinos. They're sort of like a Raspberry Pi thing. We got some sensors, and it was all nice and modular. And we gave some teams about a week to hack stuff together. And the winning one that came out was actually from Adelaide. It was quite cool. They were monitoring playground equipment just to see how much it was being used, so councils could get some feedback on which ones were being used the most, which of the kind of toys that were in the playground, which of the equipment was most popular. Turned out to be quite a useful thing. You'll see a lot more of this. So LoRa, just if you don't know, is kind of like a variant of Wi-Fi. It's very low power, it goes very long range, you don't need many base stations to get coverage, and it's very low bandwidth as well. So that's a private one. You can just basically buy some LoRa gear and set it up, and it should generally work. If a lot of people used it, there may be some issues. So if you want guarantees, that's when you have licensed spectrum, which means that a carrier has bought some, and they're managing it to make sure it doesn't get overused. So we'll just briefly look at that. Okay, so narrowband IoT. Those category M and M1 that I was talking about before. What we're talking about is reducing the cost of the LTE modules, because the typical phones with SIM cards and that, the modules cost something. So what's happening now, there's a generation where the chips are much cheaper, okay, basically, and the power's much lower, so you've got long battery life. So if you put these things out in the field, you don't have to come and change the batteries too often. And the other thing is they go wider, so they have a lot more range and you penetrate into basements and stuff like that. The other thing is the cell towers now have to support millions of devices rather than thousands of devices. So all that work's happening. And that's kind of like the rollout at the moment. So the 10 megabit one is Cat 1, that's late this year, that's starting to be tested. Category M and M1, which is middle of next year, is 1 megabit per second. And then the really cool stuff, very low bandwidth, which means very low power, that's coming later in the year. What about if you're not near a city? There's a lot of stuff happening on these low Earth orbit satellites. You may know that normal satellites, they're geostationary, so they sit up there 40,000 k's up, which is great because they cover nearly half the planet. The problem with that is long delay, and computers and software hate that, right? So if you're trying to do data-intensive stuff, it's not so hot. So there are now little satellites going up around about 1,000 kilometres, and they're spinning around really fast, so you need some clever electronics to track the buggers. But what you can do is make some, sorry about the language, you can now make a little thing about the size of a matchbox with an antenna that will actually talk. It's actually a satellite base station, and they go at very low bandwidths and very low power. So if you're outside a normal cell coverage, that's absolutely fantastic. All right, and there's just a couple of projects that Telstra worked on with VicRoads. We've got this sort of a safe work zone, so that you can tell if there's, so the poor people who are, doing the road repairs can tell if someone is going too fast near them, so they can take evasive action. At Joondalup, we're looking at environmental monitoring, connected lighting, waste collection, various things. And in Victoria, we're also looking at telematics for road safety. The other thing you can do is, if you've got the right data, so you could have Wi-Fi data of people moving around, or Bluetooth, or know where their cell stations are, where their cell phones are, you can do a lot of good in terms of city planning and transport planning. So there could be more of this coming. Something we did this year at the ITS World Congress, we actually worked with Coda Wireless, and Coda Wireless work on vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure technology. If I say that, do people know what I mean? A few, okay. Basically what's happening is we've developed some standards, so if a car nearby slams on its brakes, the cars around it get to hear that on radio and can take evasive action. Or the other thing could be there's a base station and the traffic light is actually telling you when it's going to change. So you actually know the cycle, so you can actually predict rather than having to guess. All right, so we actually did a trial at the ITS World Congress, which was in Melbourne, and what we showed was a Volvo that was communicating with traffic lights and various kinds of infrastructure, and we did that actually over LTE, which is like the mobile phone network, which was a bit of a world first, so we're quite proud of that. Watch this space, there'll be a lot more of it. Okay, I really wanted to dig into transport. So this is an exciting graph. What the left-hand side is showing is people from 16 to 34, how their transport habits have been changing. And you'll see that there's transit means that they're catching public transport, basically. That's up a bit. Walking is up a bit. Bicycles are up a huge amount. And driving is down 15%. So you've anecdotally probably noticed that people between about 20 and 30, some of them are not bothering to get their licenses. They don't buy a car. They just Uber everywhere. And what's happened in the US, about 4 years ago, we reached peak miles, which meant even though the population is still growing, the number of vehicle miles driven is actually constant, right? The growth in road traffic is actually finished. Interesting. There's a lovely LA freeway. Some of you may have experienced the charm of that thing. The thing about that is that road is absolutely full of cars. It is not full of people. There's on average 1.3 people sitting in there, just like Australia. What's been happening lately? I was just in the States a few months ago, and I caught the Caltrain, which is the thing that goes from Silicon Valley up to San Francisco. It used to be when you got on that train 15 years ago that you'd just talk to the kooky people, right, who were going off to Haight-Ashbury or something. And now you can't get on. It's full of bicycles, and you might have to wait 2 trains. So it's absolutely packed with commuters. And it's just like, this is America where the car rules, right? The other thing that's been happening, very exciting, is Uber Pool. And that's coming here very, very soon. So Uber Pool is where it's basically multi-hop. So you can get a slightly cheaper fare, and you might get some people to share the ride with. That's actually a really good thing. Normal Uber is just a taxi, does not improve the road situation because you still got 1 car for 1 person. Does not change things. Once you get 2 people or 3 people per car, that's fantastic. That's taking cars off the road, increasing the density, making better use of our infrastructure, making it less likely that we have to invest large amounts of money in building roads. Okay, so other people have noticed this, and basically there's something like 40% of the rides in the Bay Area, which is like Silicon Valley, are now done with Uber Pool, and Uber is pushing to globally get the numbers up at like 40%. And if they do that, they'll actually be a big thing for the world. Okay. And also for the car manufacturers, they're realising they're not going to sell 1 car per person forever. All right, and even Henry Ford II, he gave an announcement at World Congress in Detroit a few years back. He said, look, we know that. We're going to be selling car as a service. It's going to be different. Well, you know, with something like 20 billion people on the planet, they can't all have cars. It's just not going to work. Okay, so there's some interesting new transport options coming. There's a company called Bridge. Has anyone heard of Bridge in Boston? Nope. Okay. So Bridge is like an on-demand bus service. So now, because we've got smartphones, because we've got GPS in them, because mobile things can be connected, you can actually design a bus route based on people's actual demand rather than a schedule that's been designed. So this has been very popular in Boston. There's a version in San Francisco called Chariot, which I think was bought by General Motors, and I think Bridge has been invested in by Ford. I'll check those facts. But the big car manufacturers are looking at these things. So what this thing is, it's like a minibus. It's got coffee, it's got Wi-Fi, it's comfortable. You pay $5, you make a request, and it comes to you almost like a bus route designed for you. And these things, I think, are very exciting for any city that's urban shape, sprawled after World War II when the car was the best option to scale a city. But once you get to about 2 million people, car's not the best option anymore. And now we're having to retrofit more compact urban form onto the large, sprawling Australian cities. And these kinds of on-demand services, I think, are definitely part of the solution. The other one that's really interesting is Lyft. Everyone's heard of Lyft? It's kind of an Uber. But one of the things they're specialising in, and this is very exciting for public transport, is that last mile. So at the moment, the economics of where, say, a rail system goes is determined by the catchment. The number of passengers that can get comfortably to that rail system determines whether it's economic or not. And when you've got large, low-density cities like Australia or the US, it's very hard to justify rail. You have to be very gutsy to make that investment, okay? Now, what's happening, some of the rail companies are looking at using something like Lyft for the last mile, so you get door-to-door service on the train. In France, SNCF, which is like the national rail carrier, is teaming up with a thing called BlaBlaCar, which is kind of like the Uber and ride-sharing of France, and they're looking at doing door-to-door rides. And so your ticket, when you go to buy the train ticket, the idea of it is that you buy the ticket, but that includes the endpoint to get you to the rail and the endpoint at the other end. Okay, and that's touching on a thing called mobility as a service. And mobility as a service is basically about making it very easy to switch modes for people having really good knowledge of what's happening on the different modes and having one payment system. So whether you're getting the train, you're getting a taxi, you're hiring a car, you're hiring a bicycle, it's one payment system, you have good information, and when you book a trip, all those components are connected up. And they've been experimenting with that in Finland. So that's kind of like the next wave of what's coming. And obviously you need telecommunications to make that happen, and really good charging systems. Just on rideshare, there are Australian things happening. So there's a company called Liftango, and basically they're looking at corporate rideshare. So this is the issue of out of Macquarie Park or something, there's never enough parking spots in the city, never enough parking spots. So you get together with your work colleagues and use this app to manage it so that you can optimise the parking. And you do little incentives like the people who use rideshare get preferential parking, so on. Takes the pressure off the parking, means people drive less frequently, and also takes the pressure off the road system, so everybody's winning. So we really have to support this kind of thing, I think. The other thing that's happening, and very much in New South Wales, the last couple of years, they've been really good at fostering innovation and getting information out to people. So what's the big thing that's changed is, in the old days, the situational awareness about the traffic at the transport system was really with the operators, okay? And they have a big transport management centre, and there's all these screens everywhere telling you what's happening. The people driving around and catching the trains didn't have access to the same information. Now, because of smartphones and universal connectivity and the geospatial information you get in the phones, everyone can have the same situational awareness of what's happening in the transport system. So every person is an agent to make an intelligent decision about what to do. So that's a really important factor going forward. So just in terms of transport, there's going to be less guessing and more awareness. There's going to be less of driving your own car and more of car or mobility as a service and carpooling. Less about scheduling bus, sorry, excuse me, less about catching scheduled bus services and more about crowdsourcing buses on demand. Less walking to a train and more cycling or ride sharing to a train. Less of catching scheduled light rail and more autonomous vehicles. I barely touched on them, but the previous people did. Less of catching a normal taxi, more a taxi help on app or even an AV, and that's technically already possible with just challenges on the regulations and how we keep human drivers away from the innocent robots. Fixed charges versus pay per mile, lowering cost of modal change, which makes it easy to decide to, take a bicycle instead of taking a taxi. And finally, the urban landscape around roads and parking. There's some really exciting stuff. As we get more ride sharing, as we get more AVs running around, they don't need parking as much. So what are we going to do with all the car parks? Well, amazing things. You can use them to land drones and making new offices and all sorts of cool things. There are actually architects looking at this already. So with that, I thank you, and I think we may even have 3 minutes for a question because we're actually early. Thank you. Sorry. Last message. Smart to good. And that's me. Thank you. Oh, question. Cool. Hello. 2, good. And look, maybe for the other speakers as well, if there were questions.
Yeah. This is for Telstra.
Oh, hi.
How long will we have to wait till SIM cards are completely eliminated?
Good question. I'll get back to you on that one. Yeah, there are eSIMs coming. Okay, so that is technically possible. The actual rollout, I'm not privy to, but I can send it to the appropriate channels. Yeah.
Murray Dobbin, Teleresources Dean.
Yeah.
Sorry about the...
That's all right.
Okay. You mentioned a few standards. What about multi-fire?
Multi-fire.
Right, which is, in fact, LTE in unlicensed spectrum. And
that's a really interesting one. And the guys in Melbourne, in the technology team who basically have been working on all this narrowband IoT, they're totally across it and definitely looking at it. Our friends at NTT in Japan, they're very interested in it. They do these interesting public-private partnerships there. Yeah. So Telstra's aware of it and understands it. Yep. Hi.
Great talk so far. So Telstra was in a position to build this infrastructure before being privatized. We were talking about getting to the people. Mm-hmm. So how far is cooperation between current privatized Telstra and the government actually to bring this infrastructure across the board rather than picking the few areas?
Which infrastructure do you mean?
Starting from NBN and all the way to enabling IoT on all levels. So infrastructure about connectivity.
Well, Telstra's rolling out all the narrowband IoT stuff. The roadmap timing was there, so some of that's coming in the middle of the year. So wherever there's a cell tower, basically that will be rolled out.
Just picking the cream actually is not enabling the across population, unfortunately.
Well, wherever there's a cell tower, that's where it will go.
Okay.
It's 98%. Yeah. Further questions? Oh, Boyd. Sorry, Boyd and I used to work together. He knows a lot about radio. This could be scary.
Yeah, I spoke to somebody from Telstra at Utilities Week 2 weeks ago, and they said that they'd be rolling out NB-IoT in 2016 Q4, which is now. and or if it wasn't 2016 Q4, it'd be 2017 Q1.
Yep.
You had up there 2017 Q4, so I'm kind of wondering, I'm a bit confused now.
I took my slides from the corporate truth pack, so...
Okay, all right, okay.
No, there could be different views of what rollout means. So, like, some of it will be like, yes, it's technically feasible. Some of it is we've done trials with friendly customers, and others would be we've actually rolled out significant chunks.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, but look, if you want, I can go and get information. Are there any questions for my colleagues?